What's up, everybody? Unrest it with the questions you requested. This is JFAQ Japan's frequently asked questions, and today we've got a tricky subject, a hot topic. It is sex in Japan. Are the youth in Japan having less sex these days, or no sex whatsoever, as some papers report? Well, I would say from my years of going out to clubs and bars and many other social gatherings within Japan, I don't think there's really a lack of sex. I know plenty of people having sex in Japan. Is there a lack of long-term relationships? Is there a lack of coupling? Is there a lack of baby making? Yeah, we're starting to see that. That's very true. And there's some reasons behind that. Most of the fault falling on the government and a lot of major corporations within Japan, which kind of run the whole country as well. Number one being the working hours. These corporations make people work. When you make people work 12 hours a day and you overwork them, sometimes to death, you don't come home full of energy to do some sort of strenuous activity, that strenuous activity being sex. And when no sex happens, guess what doesn't get made? Those babies. Okay. Also, I mean, putting the effort into a long-term relationship is almost like a job in itself. I don't know how long you yourself have had a long-term relationship, but I'm sure many of you can agree who have had long-term relationships, and I'm talking, gosh, 5 years or more, it's like another job. So when you come home 12 hours from work and your wife is already asleep because she went to bed at a normal time, how do you continue on that relationship? How do you make that work when you guys are barely ever seeing each other? How do you make that work with a girlfriend if you can never see her at night because you're at work for so long? There's many different situations like this that are caused by these corporations overworking their people. Government support is also another one. The government made all these claims that they were going to help support people who had babies. So if you were going to have sex and whether it was planned or unplanned, a baby was made, you would get support from the government, as in like a little bit of bonus each year to help you pay for the very, very expensive things in Japan, such as just minor things like diapers, milk, and the most important, kindergarten or daycare, hoikuen, yochien. They're not doing that anymore, and they've put a huge salary cap on it. I mean, it covers so much that you would have to be almost completely dirt poor to make it. There's families making so little money, especially those with just single moms, that they can barely feed their kids in Japan. And this is something that's completely swept under the rug by the Japanese government. They're not going to let you see this. They're not going to report this in their own news. And their own news syndicates aren't even going to report this, or they'll get a big slap in the face by the government. Places like NHK, which is public television, the equivalent to the BBC or PBS, are also completely government controlled, so they're not going to do anything that isn't completely 100% conservative and making the government look like a bunch of superheroes. On top of that, you've got many other different aspects of Japan's culture that sometimes makes sex very impossible for people who have very low self-esteem, are not confident because of the social norms, the social pariahs that can be made from not following the unspoken social rules within Japan's workplaces, or just everyday street. You can be made a pariah within your own company if you don't follow suit in a certain style, way, manner, or holding yourself. You also can't step out of the bounds of when it is right to do this or that within a company. For example, you would not talk up the girl next to you that you're working with to try and get a date. This wouldn't be done unless you were outside of work. Even normal everyday work conversations are not too common in Japan. You don't really talk too much about your personal life at a job in Japan. And unless you're outside of the workplace or maybe on one of these drinking parties, it would be seen almost as like a social pariah type thing. It would make you lose face if you were to suddenly try to talk up a girl during your job. That makes that and even dating very difficult to form these long-term relationships. It makes meeting the opposite sex for both sexes very difficult, to the point that you see things like snack bars, you see things like hostess clubs, and people always ask me, they're like, why do these exist in Japan? Why do people pay to talk to the opposite sex? And it's because they don't actually get a chance, whereas you and I can talk up our fellow associate at work, we can talk up a fellow employee, being male or female, and it's not frowned upon. It is here in Japan, for the most part. Now, I'm speaking very, very subjectively with my opinion here. I'm making blanket statements. There's, of course, going to be little pockets of difference within Japan, but for the most part, this is the way the rules follow. On top of that, even within social school subjects in school, different social organizations, it's a little bit strange for some of them even to talk up the opposite sex, or they have to study to a point to make the grade to pass these entrance exams that they don't get the time to actually do the normal dating things that you and I did during high school. These entrance exams for college are brutal, and they are just pretty much making people into memorization machines, just so they can pass these tests in which they just drop the information out of their head anyway after all of it's over, and it doesn't leave them time to date the opposite sex and form these relationships, even to have those accidental babies, which may not be planned, but they do add to the population and help Japan keep their population on a steady level, which is currently dropping off to the point that by 2050, supposedly, the population will cut in half in Japan. There's many other things too. I mean, we've got, as the next generation changes, they are sick of this being framed into this salaryman, this housewife, these very, very, very archaic ways of life that Japan had in the past and is still trying to upkeep, but is not something that the newer youth are interested in. They don't want to be locked into a job in which they slave away. They don't want to be locked into a job like they saw their fathers, where they got to spend no times with their kids. And if they don't get locked into these jobs, they don't get paid enough money to get married, to form a family, and to follow what would consider the nuclear family here in Japan. The housewife is now becoming a woman who wants to become a career woman and work her way up the corporate ladder. But again, Japan doesn't allow that to happen, to the point that the UN has had to talk to Japan on multiple occasions about how they are not letting women climb the social ladder and keeping a very low glass ceiling. Now, will these things ever change in Japan? Well, I don't see them changing anytime soon unless our government totally dies out. From old age, pretty much, is all we're waiting for them to croak, and the entire social progress to change here, as well as the generation of very old people that control this nation. I don't know how much you know about the different age levels and population control, but for the most part, 70 plus people, and aged by 70 plus I mean, are controlling Japan. It's the gray generation controlling Japan. It's these very, very old, archaic ways controlling Japan right now. We're still very socially not progressive. Think about where America was in the 1950s. That's about where we are here in Japan right now. And you're getting a generation that is more of the year, 2000 type American generation. They're acting like that in a 1950s social system. It's not matching up. Sex is happening in Japan. People are having lots of sex. They're enjoying sex. Are they doing it to form long-term intimate relationships? Not as much. Are they doing it to create the next generation of Japanese? Not as much. Who's to blame? My opinion, the government and the corporations that overwork their people. I hope I've helped you understand a little bit about sex in Japan and if it's happening with our youth. Until next time, I'm unrested with the questions you requested. This is JFAQ Japan's Frequently Asked Questions. Have a good one.